Hello, very good morning to you. And we start with that breaking news as the energy regulator Ofgem announces the new price cap for fuel bills in England, Wales and Scotland. So from October, the energy price cap will increase to £3,549. Now, that's a huge rise from the current £1,971 per year. That's been in force since April. Well, let's get reaction straight away from our business correspondent, Helen-Anne Smith, who's embarking in East London. So, Helen-Anne Smith, a huge rise in the price cap, £3,549, hitting people's bills from October, just as was feared.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Anna. It's a hugely important morning, very significant, and I think very frightening for a lot of people up and down this country who have been knowing that this price cap is coming, this price cap rise has been coming, knowing that autumn is on its way, and feeling very worried indeed about how they're going to pay their bills through the coming winter. So we know now just how much that cap is going to go up by. £3,549 a year will be the typical price of an average person's bill. That is the cap that Ofgem say the maximum that they can charge. Just to sort of clarify what that cap involves, it is a cap on essentially the unit of energy that each of us will buy, that Ofgem say that the energy companies are allowed to sell, plus the standing charge. So essentially it is the maximum amount that a typical bill is allowed to cost, essentially. Just important to stress, though, your bills could be slightly more than that or slightly less than that, depending on how much energy you use. It's also the price for what's called a default tariff or a standard variable tariff, as that's the sort of tariff that you're on. Worth saying that people on prepayment meters will also have a rise to their cap as well. It will be slightly different to this number that we're talking about. And once we get that full release from Ofgem, we'll go through those numbers and we'll bring them to you as well. But look, I think it's important to take a step back and put this number in some context. This is in roughly the region of 80% in terms of the amount that bills are rising from what they currently are now. They're currently just shy of £2,000 a year, rising by roughly 80%. So that is a hugely significant rise. And compare that to last winter, because remember, the price of the bills now came into force in April. So last October, the cap that was in force throughout last winter, and then we're talking about now 2.5 times as much this winter, roughly. And so a huge difference for people in their lives in a very frightening time indeed. The causes and the reasons, we've covered them a lot, Anna, but I think it's worth just reiterating. The big driver in all this is the massive surge in the price of wholesale gas. Those prices of wholesale gas were rising before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but that is the big factor that have caused them to absolutely skyrocket to record highs in recent months. They really peaked back in the spring when that invasion happened, but they have started really rising up again to roughly what they were when the invasion happened. And the reason for that is there's a sense and a fear that lots of companies across Europe are trying to hedge, trying to gather in, buy as much energy they can ahead of the winter, but also a sense that Russia is flexing its muscles. We know that next week, the pipeline, the big pipeline that's called Nord Stream 1, it carries Russian gas to Europe. It's being shut off for 3 days. The Russians say that's because of maintenance, but the markets fear that it's a threat in terms of how Russia wants to behave in terms of its selling of gas to Europe. It sells some 40% of European gas in the EU comes from Russia. It certainly did before the war. So a hugely significant supplier, and that is what's caused prices to skyrocket. But of course, if you're a customer at home, that's not going to make you feel much better. And that wholesale price, unfortunately, your household energy company, your consumer-facing energy company, the people that you buy your energy from, they are in a position where they have to pay those exorbitant prices to buy their gas. They have to pass that on to their customers, or they risk going out of business, and them going out of business would make the whole situation worse. So we are in this very critical position. The only option really for people is for the government to do more to try and mitigate some of that impact of these huge rising bills. Both candidates have indicated very strongly that they will do something. What that is remains to be seen. And of course, many people say it might all come in quite late. It takes a long time to implement these sort of measures. So nerve-wracking news indeed today. The energy price cap up in a region of about 80%, £3,549 a year for the typical bill.
Yeah, Helena, thanks very much indeed. It's news, isn't it, that affects so many of us. So let's just reiterate that breaking news for you that we've just got in the last few moments. Ofgem has announced that the energy price cap is going to go up to £3,549 from October. Now, that's a huge jump. The price cap is currently set at £1,971, so it's roughly an 80% rise there to the energy cap. So let's just look at what the energy cap is and how does it affect you. So it sets the maximum price that companies can charge for each unit of energy that a household uses on a standard variable tariff. So it doesn't limit your total bill, it only reflects typical usage. So if you use more units, you will be charged more. The cap used to be reviewed twice a year, but now it's going to happen every 3 months, and it applies across England, Wales and Scotland. So let's stick with the story and get some reaction to the new energy price cap. I'm joined now by Adam Scorer, who's the Chief Executive of the fuel poverty charity, National Energy Action. Very good morning to you, Adam Scorer. Thanks so much for talking to us. So we've just heard the new energy price cap roughly in line with the predictions, £3,549 from October. What's your reaction?
Well, it's confirmation of some very, very bad news, and it will be extremely worrying as we look into winter and the costs that households will face, but it will be terrifying when you actually get into winter. So 80% more, that's £750 more than the Ofgem projection in May on which the Chancellor based the price support package. So we're not only seeing the size of the average bill, we're seeing the inadequacy of the support that's available for the households on the lowest incomes and who are most vulnerable to these price rises.
Well, yeah, give us more of an idea of what this means for them. We've had various warnings about what the winter's going to mean for those less well off in the country. Yesterday, the Resolution Foundation said that rising bills will lead to more deaths through the cold weather. What's your prediction for what this price rise could mean?
Resolution Foundation are absolutely right. There is a hard connection between people who live in cold and damp homes and around 10,000 people every year who die of the effect of those cold homes. We'll have a million more homes that will not be heated this winter. It's a pretty simple equation. That leads to more ill health. It leads to more death. I pay by direct debit. My costs are spread across the year. If you're paying by a prepayment meter, not only are you paying more than the average cap that you've mentioned the cap for the direct debit costs, but you're paying as you use it. So in January, the really intense month, the average someone on a prepayment meter could be paying £600 for a decent level of warmth. And of course, the consequence is they just won't heat their homes and they won't heat their water. They won't give their children baths. They won't cook hot food. The privation will be enormous if people want to avoid impossible levels of debt.
So what needs to be done?
I mean, quite simply, we need a big and proportionate response, firstly, from government. We haven't really seen something of the scale of this before. At the very, very least, they've got to double the price support package they announced in May. They've got to work with the regulator to bring a social tariff in to make this, to hardwire support in for vulnerable households. They've got to deliver their manifesto commitments on energy efficiency for the warm homes. And they just got to think big. This is a systemic problem. It explodes our welfare benefit safety net. People cannot afford, no choices, no scrimping, no cutting back, simply cannot afford price rises at this level.
And the government has made clear that no policy will be announced until the new Prime Minister takes over in a couple of weeks' time. Do you have sympathy with that? And do you have confidence that two leadership candidates understand the scale that you says this issue is standing at?
I had zero sympathy for the government's approach on this. We didn't need to wait to today to know what the level of the price cap was going to be. It was projected with a great deal of certainty and accuracy some months ago. Knowing the last penny is no excuse. The steps I've mentioned before are with the grain of established government policy. It could just be to add to those to deliver a decent support. The earlier you get the support package announced, the earlier you can think about the logistics of delivering it and make sure that people don't fall through the gaps. If we have to wait until the 5th of September when the new Prime Minister is announced, then it needs to be the first thing they do. And they had better done some work in the background to prepare themselves, because everything so far has been inadequate. short-term, poorly targeted, or just not comprehending the scale of the impact this will have for households, especially when we hit the heating season in winter.
But do you trust that Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will handle this adequately? Do you have trust that they will?
If you look at what they've said so far, I think Rishi Sunak has announced that he will build on his support package. That's short term, but it is targeted, and it will kind of take the sting out of the tail as we head in, sting out of the bite of these price rises as we head into winter. But to be honest, I've seen nothing material from Liz Truss. It's either poorly targeted and wholly inadequate, or based on some future mythic kind of idea of supply resilience. So neither of them have either got the scale of it, the duration of this crisis, and the notion that we need to think big and bold and differently about how we protect some of the most vulnerable households in the UK, quite simply from devastation as we head into the winter.
Well, yes, and Liz Truss has today said that she's pledging immediate support, hasn't she? But we haven't got more details yet of what that will involve.
Detail matters.
What the government can do.
It has to be delivered. Logistics need to be put in place to deliver these things. The later you leave it, the more difficult that delivery becomes, and the more likelihood that it will be full of holes and will be inadequate. There is no value in delay.
OK, and what about what companies can do? We focused on what politicians might be able to do. We have seen British Gas saying that it will put 10% of its profits towards helping more vulnerable customers. Do you welcome that? I mean, the amount that it produces is perhaps not going to solve the problem, but would you like to see more companies take action like that?
I welcome that commitment from British Gas. We know it won't really touch the sides, but it's an important commitment from a company that is still making profits in the retail market. But what they've got to do the basics, though. They've got to make sure that they do not impose prepayment meter on people struggling for debt, because that will make their situation worse. They've got to have a really sensitive approach to debt recovery. They've got to reach out and support those households, especially those in vulnerable conditions, kind of older households with medical dependencies or disabilities, to make sure they're alert to the issues that they will have just struggling to try and make these bills. They've got to step forward and reach out and support their customers. But the basics of this is it's down to government. It's down to government to step in and prevent a cost of living crisis becoming a cost in lives crisis over the winter.
What about the regulator? It's them who've announced this price cap, this rise of around 80%. What do you make of how Ofgem is handling this, and is the price cap fit for purpose?
Ofgem have got a lot of work to do. I think the price cap, of course, was introduced to ensure that people who weren't active in the market didn't get an outrageous bill. It wasn't meant to be a fuel poverty measure, and it's creaking. It's showing that it's not really up, and nothing was really up for price rises of this scale. But Ofgem has got to really enforce the regulations that require energy suppliers to treat their vulnerable and low-income households fairly. It's got to think about social tariffs, ways of instituting at the heart of our regulatory environment greater protection for those on the lowest incomes. It's got to think harder about how we make sure that if you want a prepayment meter, you're not so disadvantaged in the market and so likely to cut yourself off from gas. It's got a lot of work to do. In many ways, this crisis is so unprecedented that the provisions we've had for good years are just blown away by this crisis. But I think they should have done more, to be honest. I think they should have done more on the standing charge. So that means if you are, either you have to cut back or you are cutting back, you're still seeing an excessive rise because of what's loaded into the standing charge. So lots of things that the regulator needs to do and the companies need to do. But come on, it's government. This is a crisis of the poorest households in our society facing Armageddon over the winter. It is only government that can step in and make sure this isn't disastrous over the winter and next winter as well.
And finally, what's your advice to those who are worried about the months ahead and being able to pay their bills?
I wish I could give some real proper advice. My single piece of advice, and millions will be in this situation, it looks like you just simply cannot afford the bill, just get in touch with your supplier. Acknowledge the situation you're in. If you are in debt, get a debt repayment plan that meets your needs. Get all the advice that you can. There's things that everyone can do. If you can turn your thermostat down by 1 degree, that's great. You can close your curtains when it gets at dusk, that's great. There's other things that you can do, but they're marginal. They're marginal. If you fear getting into problem debt, get in touch with your supplier early as you can to set a repayment plan that meets your needs, and get all the advice and support you can from other organisations.
OK, Adam Scorer, thanks very much indeed for joining us here this morning and giving your instant reaction to that new energy price cap of £3,549. Adam Scorer, thanks very much indeed. So now we know just how high energy bills are going to rise this autumn, with campaigners calling for urgent action from the government, as you heard there, to help millions of struggling households. Well, the Chancellor has just released a statement in response to this, saying, "I know the energy price cap announcement this morning will cause stress and anxiety for many people, but help is coming, with £400 off energy bills for all, the second instalment of a £650 payment for vulnerable households, and £300 for all pensioners." While Putin is driving up energy prices in revenge for our support of Ukraine's brave struggle for freedom, I'm working flat out to develop options for further support. And this will mean the incoming Prime Minister can hit the ground running and deliver support to those who need it most as soon as possible. So that's the Chancellor's statement in response to the energy price cap announcement in the last few moments. So let's bring in our political correspondent, Amanda Acas, now. We heard there from Adam Scorer calling on more action from the government, but we're not going to get any new plans, are we, until there's a new Prime Minister installed?
Yes, indeed. So I think all of this will really pile more pressure on the two leadership candidates to really set out in detail exactly how they're going to help households budget for this very difficult winter ahead. And indeed, as you say, really highlights this power vacuum at the top of government. It's still 11 days until the new Prime Minister will take office and begin to even be able to start taking action. What might that be? Well, we've had some interesting slight change of tack from Liz Truss overnight. Throughout the campaign, she's been stressing, of course, the way to help people with the cost of living is cutting taxes. She's been quite dismissive of the idea of handouts, as she's described them. But now, writing in the Daily Mail, she says she knows exactly how hard it is for people dealing with this crisis, and says, to those of you feeling the squeeze, my message is clear. I will ensure support is on its way to get you through these tough times. So her team have rather been signalling over the past week that they were moving towards offering some kind of additional support. This is really the very clearest signal that she has really changed tack quite dramatically from where she was at the start of this leadership campaign. Clearly, the pressure of what's been happening really has been getting to her. Now, Rishi Sunak, her rival, on the other hand, I mean, first of all, he says offering a big package of support as well as the tax cuts, well, that will lead to inflation, which will make everything worse. He all along really has been pledging additional support for the most vulnerable, so people on low incomes and pensioners, along the lines of the kind of package that he put in place when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. But neither of them still are willing to give us really any details on what exactly they might be able to give people. Even in that statement we heard there from the Chancellor, he says more help is on its way. But those figures, the £400, the £650, that's what was already announced back in March. So it's not new, although it is now coming in. And of course, the situation has got much worse since then. So I think that's quite crucial that he is saying that the Treasury are working up different options for the next Prime Minister when they do come in. Now, interestingly as well, yesterday he ruled out said he certainly doesn't support the idea of a freeze on the energy prices, and neither Liz Truss or Mr Sunak, neither of them support this either. There are two proposals on the table for that. So Labour, of course, saying we're going to freeze bills for 6 months, and that would cost £30 billion paid for by a windfall tax on the energy companies. The energy companies themselves are proposing a freeze for 2 years, which would cost around £100 billion. That would be paid for by the government, which would have a huge long-term impact on taxpayers because we'd all be paying for that for many years to come. Mr Zahawi says support needs to be more targeted. But we know a Sky News poll yesterday suggested a third of households are already struggling to pay their bills. This is only going to get much, much worse. So really, with the new Prime Minister coming into office in 11 days' time, I think action can't come soon enough.
Indeed, Amanda, and yeah, we'll be exploring this throughout the morning, of course. Thanks very much indeed. Well, lots still to come on the show, and at 8 o'clock I'll be speaking to the Chief Executive of Ofgem about that new price cap. Meanwhile, as more than 100,000 postal workers walk off the job in this summer of strikes, I'm going to be speaking to their union leader, Dave Ward. And I'll also speak to the Royal Mail's Chief Executive, Simon Thompson, about how long services will be disrupted. In fact, let's find out a little bit more about that postal strike right now, shall we? Sky's Ivor Bennett joins me now from the picket line in East London. So, Ivor, tell us a little bit about what this strike's all about and how people are going to be impacted.
Yeah, another day, another strike. This is being billed as the biggest of the summer so far, with 115,000 Royal Mail workers walking out across the UK. This picket line is one of 1,500, although I'm not sure how many others can boast a special guest behind me. You might be able to make out Postman Pat there, but no sign of his bright red van, I'm afraid, because anyone who is planning to post anything today or is waiting for something to arrive may have to wait a little bit longer, because anything posted yesterday, today or tomorrow is likely to be delayed. Royal Mail have said they're going to prioritise certain things like medical prescriptions, but disruption is expected. Now, the main bone of contention in this dispute, like with many of the other disputes we've seen over the summer, is over pay. Royal Mail say they've offered workers up to a 5.5% pay rise. But the union behind this, the Communication Workers Union, say that's not enough. They say they want something more in line with the current rate of inflation, which is around 10%. It's set to rise to 13%, according to the Bank of England. And they want something to reflect the rising cost of living, which we've been hearing so much about, of course, this morning. And they say they still haven't been properly recognised for their work during the pandemic when they were key workers. Now, separate to this, there is also a strike being organised by post office workers, with around 2,000 walking out in branches across the UK. So a lot of disruption today to the postal system, and more disruption expected, with 3 more walkouts by Royal Mail staff organised over the next 2 weeks.
Ivor, thanks very much indeed for that. Now, the family of Olivia Pratt have appealed for people to do the right thing to help police find her killer. The 9-year-old was shot in her home in Liverpool on Monday night, and a huge murder investigation is now underway to track down her killer. Well, Sky's Shingi Mararike is in Liverpool for us this morning. So, Shingi, what's the latest on the police investigation? What are they saying?
Morning, Anna. So that statement from her family, giving you a sense as to the grief that they're feeling, and also a sense as to the little girl that Olivia was, who enjoyed playing on the street, and as they described as a 9-year-old going on 19. And I have their statement with me, or part of it. Liv was adored by everyone who knew her and would instantly make friends with anyone and everyone. She was often seen going up and down the street on her new bike she had just got for her birthday. We as a family are heartbroken and have lost a huge part of our life. If anyone knows anything, now is the time to speak up. It is not about being a snitch or a grass. It is about finding out who took our baby away from us. Please do the right thing. And you asked about the police investigation. That sentiment has been echoed by the police as well over the last few days. They've been asking people to come forward. And yesterday in a briefing, they said that they are following several positive lines of inquiry. We know that Joseph Nee was a man who was arrested for breaching his licence conditions. He was the man who tried to force his way into the house and was then taken away in a black Audi as Olivia lay dying. We also know through the police that the man who he was with, who was approached by a gunman, who he was with when he was approached by a gunman, has also been spoken to and identified, as were the men in that Audi. The police also spoke about 2 other murder investigations going on in Liverpool, and 5 arrests have been made in connection to those. But this is obviously now a massive manhunt, and we don't have the name of the suspect in the killing of Olivia. And now not just the police, but her family are asking people to come forward and do the right thing.
Shingi, thanks very much indeed. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And a hosepipe ban for around 5 million people across Yorkshire comes into force today. Yorkshire Water says many areas have seen their lowest rainfall since records began more than 130 years ago. The head of the RAF has said he'll address questions raised over diversity targets in the Air Force, along with allegations of sexual harassment and bullying within the Red Arrows. Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston said anyone with concerns about activity within the service should raise it with their chain of command, alert a confidential helpline, or tell the RAF police. A redacted version of the affidavit used for the search of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate is set to be made public later on today. It's likely to contain key information about why FBI agents searched the president's property and some of the evidence that the government presented to the judge. Mark Zuckerberg has revealed that Facebook suppressed articles about a story concerning the son of US President Joe Biden during the 2020 election. Conservatives accused Facebook of censoring the story about Hunter Biden's laptop. Speaking to podcaster Joe Rogan, Mr. Zuckerberg confirmed they limited shares of the story after the FBI warned Facebook of Russian propaganda.
If something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful.
President Zelenskyy has said the world narrowly avoided a radiation disaster when Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is occupied by Russian forces, was disconnected from the national grid. The Ukrainian leader claimed Russian shelling had caused a fire, which led to the reactor being cut off.
Diesel generators immediately started providing energy to support it after the shutdown. The world must understand what a threat this is. If the diesel generator had not been turned on, if the automation and our station staff had not worked after the blackout, we would now be forced to overcome the consequences of a radiation emergency. Russia has put Ukraine and all Europeans one step away from radiation disaster.
Well, our Defence and Security Editor, Debora Haynes, is in the capital, Kiev, for us this morning. So, Deborah, there seems to be real concern about this nuclear plant.
Yes, it's been a worry, hasn't it, for in particular, in the last few weeks, when there's been, from the Ukrainian side, accusing the Russian forces of shelling onto the plant, and clearly were any kind of attack to happen that would impact the reactors there, then that's obviously why the country is so worried. It's the largest nuclear energy plant in Europe, and so the consequences of a disaster there, I mean, people in this country are no stranger, unfortunately, to nuclear disaster, given that they lived through the Chernobyl horrors in 1986, but clearly that's in their mind when they're looking at what's happening around Zaporizhzhia. On the Russian side, they were blaming Ukrainian forces for some kind of fire that triggered this plant being disconnected from the energy grid, and that energy is needed to be fed into the plant in order to keep power on the various safety mechanisms that keeps that plant safe. Now, while the disaster was averted yesterday, the battles around the plant are continuing, and every day it goes on, the risk remains of a disaster happening. The UN's nuclear energy watchdog, the IAEA, has been trying to get access to the plant. The Ukrainian side has said that they hope that could happen soon. It hasn't happened yet. And as long as this plant remains out of the control or the scrutiny of the international community, then it's clearly going to be a huge problem. It's been effectively under
Russian control. Since March, there are Ukrainian officials in the plant being held there while they obviously have to keep maintaining their vital work to keep the plant safe. It must be a horrendous situation for them too. And it is yet another reminder of the byproduct of this war that's gripped this country now for more than 6 months.
And with parts of the world experiencing some extreme weather conditions, let's take a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet and show you our data dashboard here. At the right-hand side of this screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced. A lot of focus on gas this morning with the price cap being announced. 61% of our power currently coming from gas at the moment. And here on the top left, you can see how much warmer the Earth is now than in 1880. That's when records began, the Industrial Revolution, essentially. 1.256, the figure there. And this is the amount of CO2 emissions being pumped out globally at the moment in millions of tonnes. And you can see that number's rising all the time there. Hello, welcome back. Let's get more now on the breaking news this morning about the energy price cap. Fuel bills are set to increase by more than £1,500 from the average family from October. It's rising to £3,549. So let's take you through what the energy price cap is and how it might affect you. So it sets the maximum price that companies can charge for each unit of energy that a household uses on a standard variable tariff. So it doesn't limit your overall bill. If you use more units, you'll be charged more. The cap used to be reviewed twice a year, but now it happens every 3 months, and it applies across England, Wales and Scotland, affecting an estimated 22 million households on a variable tariff. And the new cap will take effect from October the 1st. Now, most of what you pay goes towards wholesale costs. The rest is for things like green levies and VAT. And this puts things into some perspective. Today's significant jump to £3,549 towers over previous increases. So what is the government doing so far to help? Well, all households will be given a one-off £400 discount on their fuel bills in October, and £650 will be paid to more than 8 million low-income households who receive benefits. Pensioners and individuals with disabilities will receive further help. Well, speaking to the programme in the last hour, the chief executive of the fuel poverty charity National Energy Action said the rise could lead to 1 million more homes not being heated this winter. Adam Scorer said a big response is needed from the government to prevent the cost of living crisis becoming a cost of lives crisis.
There is a hard connection between people who live in cold and damp homes and around 10,000 people every year who die of the effect of those cold homes. We'll have 1 million more homes that will not be heated this winter. It's a pretty simple equation. That leads to more ill health. It leads to more death. This is a systemic problem. It explodes our welfare benefit safety net. People cannot afford, no choices, no scrimping, no cutting back, simply cannot afford price rises at this level.
So let's get more reaction to that new energy price cap and what it'll mean for households across the country. Joining me now is Kim Eldridge, who campaigns for Don't Pay UK. Very good morning to you, Kim Eldridge. What do you make of this new price cap, £3,549? Give us an idea of how it could affect you and your family, for example.
Yeah, I'm really upset that the price cap has hit the 80% that they predicted. It's just shocking. So Don't Pay UK, the website has loads of information on it. My mum she's struggling, she's disabled, she's on benefits, and she already can't afford her bills. They've gone up to £118 a month from £55 last year. She cannot afford it. This price cap, it's just crazy. She was already talking to my granddad about having to move in with him this winter to be able to, heat one home rather than heating 2 homes. This increase genuinely means debt or death for a lot of people. People are going to fall into debt with their energy companies, or they're going to freeze to death in their homes.
Well, and there are a lot of people like your family very worried about how they will pay their bills this winter. But Tell us why you think that not paying your bills is the right approach. There are warnings around, aren't there, that if you don't pay your bills, that debt will follow you around. I mean, there's a risk of legal action. There's a risk of not being able to borrow money in future that will affect your credit rating. Is this the right approach? Do you not risk penalising yourself as much as the energy companies?
That is a great point, but you know what? I think there's a lot of fear-mongering around this. People simply can't afford it. My mum doesn't have that money coming in, so it's a matter of her not paying now or, well, getting into debt over the winter anyway. So it absolutely makes no difference for her when she gets into debt with the energy company. We're asking 1 million people to sign this pledge on the don'tpay.uk website. We all deserve to have a warm home this winter. You know, schools need to be heated this winter.
OK, well, apologies there if you missed some of the rest at the end of that interview there. I was talking there to Kim Eldridge from Don't Pay UK, and if she didn't hear me thank her, thanks very much indeed for that. Let's move on, though. More than 100,000 Royal Mail postal workers have gone on strike in a dispute over pay. Members of the Communication Workers Union said the 2% pay rise imposed on them by management was not good enough. Well, I'm joined now by the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, Dave Ward. Dave Ward, a very good morning to you. First of all, give us a sense of the size and scale of the action that you're taking today and the levels of disruption it's likely to cause.
Sorry, it's difficult to hear. Sorry, say that again.
Just wanted to give me a sense of the scale of the action that you're taking today and the levels of disruption it's likely to cause.
Yeah, OK, so there's 115,000 postal workers taking strike action today. It's the biggest strike in the UK since 2009. It's also probably the biggest mandate that any union has ever had for strike action. Over 97.7% members voted in favour of strike action on a 77% turnout. Our members are really, really angry and have lost all confidence in the leadership of the company. The company made £758 million profit, record profits for Royal Mail last year. They chose to give away over £400 million to shareholders. They rewarded themselves with huge record bonuses, apparently for achieving all their financial targets, and then they imposed a 2% pay increase on the workforce. And against skyrocketing inflation, energy bills rocketing, people are just not going to accept that. And I think that what's really a shame here is that this is a group of workers in the UK that we would argue are one of the last remaining pillars of our society. They're part of the social fabric of the UK. They have a fantastic relationship with customers, which is the company's greatest asset. And it is unbelievable that the company have chosen to treat our members in this way. So, you know, we're going to fight very hard here to get the pay rise that our members deserve.
Well, yes, you say they're making record profits. Royal Mail says your proposals would cost £1 billion, while it's losing almost £1 million a day. They say that their business is suffering. There are fewer COVID tests being delivered, for example. There are fewer people shopping online post-pandemic. And there's a steeply declining letter market. And they simply have to be able to compete with some of their competitors. So that's reasonable, isn't it?
Anna, listen, I wish you could get Royal Mail to debate these issues and the statement that you've just read out, because we would take that debate anywhere, any place, any time, to point out that it's a total fabrication of the truth of what's going on in this company. And these people are being less than honest with you, less than honest with their customers, and you know, it's just not on. I mean, they made record profits. They have said that their bonuses were achieved because they hit all of their financial targets. And yes, there are some issues. We understand that. We will never face away from change. It's our union that wants to get on and do the right change that protects the company for the future. But the company have stalled those talks. We've got a second ballot on change because they've walked away from the agreement that we reached with them. And something that I've got to raise today, that we wrote to the company about a couple of days back, we really do believe that sitting behind this dispute, the motives for this company is that they are involved at the moment in secret discussions on a takeover of this company, on bringing in one of these the same type of scenario, private equity investment group, in this case a company called Vesa from Luxembourg, and they are going to asset strip this company. They're going to abandon the universal service, and they want to turn Royal Mail to make more profits for themselves and the shareholders into another gig economy employer. And we are not going to accept that.
OK, well, we will certainly put that to the company. In the meantime, Royal Mail say that you've rejected a deal. You say it's 2%. They say it's 5.5% because they say that an extra 3.5% is subject to agreement on a series of changes. So why are you rejecting that?
Well, that's pie in the sky, and I'm sorry to go back to the same theme. It's simply not true. That offer, as you call it, was put to our members directly by the company before our members even voted in the numbers that I just described earlier on. It is pie in the sky. The 2% was imposed. 2% of that is supposedly against a productivity scheme that doesn't exist. And nobody in the company can sit in front of anybody in the union and explain what it is our members have got to do to earn that 2%. And the other 1.5% of that is against a levelling down agenda, one of these P&O style levelling down agendas, which will destroy the post office as we know it, Royal Mail as we know it, and we're not going to accept it. I'm sorry to say it's completely untrue what they're saying to you, and our members know that. Postal workers would not be voting in the numbers that they're voting in if any of what you said was true. But by the way, 5.5%, even if it was there, is not enough against inflation and against the horrendous energy bills that our members and millions of other people in this country are going to be facing.
Dave Ward, are we likely to see a general strike in this country, do you think? Would you back one if there was one called?
Look, I'm not here to talk about a general strike. What I will say to you is that, I think people across the UK, every worker counts, every worker's in the same position. And yes, I think we should be looking at coordinated action. We should be looking to raise issues around the way that UK companies are being run, the blatant profiteering that's taking place across the UK, because not only are the workforce being ripped off here, but also customers are being ripped off. These are the people who are causing the spiral in inflation that's going on. And something's got to be done about the way that UK businesses operate. And Royal Mail is right at the top of that list at the moment. We've got our sights on them. It is time. If these people are really only interested in further profits for themselves, then they should resign from this company and get people in who want to take forward this great company that's been in existence over 500 years. We'll deal with any change. We've agreed all change on technology, on automation. So don't believe that the stuff that they're putting out. And honestly, get them on the programme with me, with our union, and we'll debate all of those issues live in front of the British public.
OK, we'll put that invitation to them. We are speaking to Royal Mail a little bit later on. But Dave Ward, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Time to take a check on what's happening in the world of sport now. Here's Jackie.
Thank you, Anna. We start with a really horrible image for Liverpool fans this morning. The Champions League group stages draw has been made and Real Madrid will defend their crown after winning it a record 13th time last season, while Liverpool lost to the Spanish giants in that final. And this year, Jurgen Klopp's side have been drawn alongside Rangers. It will be Rangers' first appearance in the competition in more than a decade after they won their playoff game against PSV Eindhoven on Wednesday. Scottish champions Celtic, meanwhile, have been drawn in Group F as well. Premier League champions Manchester City have been put into Group G, where they'll come up against Sevilla and Erling Haaland's former club Borussia Dortmund. The 2021 champions Chelsea have AC Milan for company in Group E, while Spurs are with Europa League winners Frankfurt in Group D. Let's move on to tennis. And Emma Raducanu has been handed a very tough draw as she begins the defence of her US Open title against France's Elise Cornet. Cam Norrie plays Benoit Paire of France, and Andy Murray starts against Francisco Cerundolo. And could it be a last ever tournament for Serena Williams? The 23-time Grand Slam champion faces Danka Kovinic in the first round. The 40-year-old is looking to bid farewell to Flushing Meadows with the 7th US Open crown. Novak Djokovic will not take part in the tournament because non-vaccinated visitors are still banned in the United States. The Wimbledon champion, who's on 21 Grand Slam titles, will miss the chance to add to that tally. To golf, and Rory McIlroy has recovered from very tough starts in the Tour Championship at East Lake Atlanta, while Scotty Scheffler bolstered his hopes of FedEx Cup victory by extending his lead. Well, McIlroy sent his opening tee shot out of bounds on his way to a triple bogey, but an eagle here on the 6th helped him to 3 under on the day, 7 under overall, still in touch. That is all we sport for now, but I'll be back with more in an hour's time.
Jackie, thanks very much indeed. So let's go back to our breaking news this morning on the new energy price cap, which will rise to £3,549 from October. That's about an 80% rise. I'm joined now to get reaction by Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. So a very good morning to you. What do you make of this new price cap?
Well, although it was expected, that doesn't reduce the severity and the seriousness of this announcement. It will strike fear into the hearts of families and pensioners right across the country. And that's why Labour have called for the government to take autumn and winter and to pay for that with an extension of the windfall tax on the massive profits that North Sea oil and gas companies are continuing to make. That is the right and the fair thing to do. It's what Labour would do if we were in government now.
Well, yes, and you've laid out your plans, this freeze on energy bills over the winter, but a lot of people say it's an incredibly expensive and only short-term fix.
It's a package of measures worth £29 billion, and that includes the price freeze that would mean that no one would pay a penny more for their gas and electricity this autumn and winter. And it would also mean for the 4 million customers who are on prepayment meters, who at the moment pay more for their gas and electricity than if you pay by direct debit, that they would no longer face that premium, which would help some of the poorest people. We would pay for this through a package of revenue raisers, including £8 billion from an extension of the windfall tax, £14 billion from repurposing government announcements already on gas and electricity, and £7 billion through the lower interest that would be paid on government debt, because these measures directly reduce the headline rate of inflation, which much government debt is dependent on.
Well, yes, you say £29 billion, but is this fully funded? I noticed that the charity Full Fact today is raising some questions about whether your plan actually would cover this price cap rise. They say that your plan doesn't take into account most customers' higher gas and electricity consumption during the winter. It's going to be more expensive, and it falls short at the moment, doesn't it?
Well, last time Full Fact fact-checked some Labour analysis, they had to withdraw it a couple of days later because they'd got their numbers wrong. I worked as an economist at the Bank of England for many years before I became a Member of Parliament. I'm confident about my numbers. I'm confident that they stack up. But most of all, I am very confident that the package of measures that we've announced will make a real difference to families and pensioners who are worried sick about what is going to happen to them this winter.
It would also benefit a lot of people that don't need the help. Why are you not going for more targeted help for those who need it most?
Well, we know that people on lower incomes spend 3 times as much on gas and electricity as a share of their income than the richest households. So this will have a disproportionate positive impact on some of the poorest families. We also know that the 4 million people who use prepayment meters are some of the poorest families and pensioners in our country, and our package offers an extra £300 to them over the winter months. So we think it helps those on the lowest incomes the most. But also I would say this, I've been speaking to Leeds Money Buddies, a charity that's very active in my constituency, helping people with financial difficulties, that they say that there are people coming to them now who have never had financial difficulties before, but are now being thrown into chaos and disarray by these energy price increases. The University of York say that 2/3 of the households now risk falling into fuel poverty. And so it is important that a package of measures helps people beyond those who are on benefits, because the fact is that these devastating increases in prices are going to have impacts on people right through the income distribution. Our package is simple. It doesn't rely on rebates. It just says the prices won't go up beyond where they are already. And that will be funded in part by that big increase in the windfall tax to ensure that those people who are making big profits based on these high
Apologies,
prices.
Rachel. We're about to fall off air. I must thank you and say thanks.